I didn't raise my voice when Shane slid the folder across the table and told me without even looking up, "Your promotion review has been removed from the agenda." No explanation, no apology, just the quiet expectation that I'd swallow it the way I'd swallowed every extra project, every late-night emergency, every promise they'd dangled in front of me for years. What he didn't realize was that this time I wasn't backing down. I was finally done, and I had something he never expected me to use. My name's Logan Mitchell. I'm 47 years old, and for 15 years I walked through the glass doors of Redline Freight Systems, believing that hard work still meant something in this country. That showing up early, staying late, and holding an entire region's operations together would eventually earn the respect and promotion I'd been promised again and again. I'd built my career the old-school way, the way men my generation were taught to believe in. No shortcuts, no politics, just results. Look, I had a mortgage to think about. College tuition for my daughter Sarah coming up in 2 years. My wife Diana supported my career, but she'd started asking the questions any smart woman would ask. "Logan, when exactly is this promotion happening? We've been waiting 3 years." Those conversations at the kitchen table, going over the bills, planning for Sarah's future, they weighed on me more than any crisis at work ever could. A man provides for his family. That's not old-fashioned, that's just reality. I coordinated freight across mountain passes during blizzards, rerouted full networks in the middle of wildfires, and held on-time delivery numbers our competitors couldn't touch, even on their best days. My military training from my Army Reserve days taught me something Shane never learned. You don't panic, you assess, you execute, and you take responsibility for the outcome. I knew every driver by name, every manufacturing client's quirks, every pressure point in our supply chain that could turn a late truck into a multi-million-dollar problem. When a crisis hit, people didn't call Shane, our VP, they called me. Somehow, he still sat in the executive meetings while I was the one stitching the region together hour by hour. I used to shrug it off, telling myself that recognition always comes later for guys like me. Quiet workers who don't brag, who don't play the political game, who just get the job done so the company can keep its promises to the customers who pay all our salaries. I didn't realize at the time how dangerous that belief was. Because while I was staying loyal, working those 60-hour weeks and missing Sarah's soccer games to handle weekend emergencies, Redline was slowly learning that I would save the day no matter how little they invested back into me. I was the one who built the winter logistics protocol that saved them nearly $2 million in penalties during the 2019 storms. I was the one who negotiated new carrier contracts when fuel prices spiked in 2021. I was the one who stopped a major client from switching to a competitor after Shane completely mishandled their account review last spring, and I did it with a calm face, steady voice, and a sense of duty I'd mistaken for pride. People called me the backbone of the region. Shane called me dependable. At the time, I thought that was a compliment. It took me much longer than it should have to understand that dependable is what executives call you when they know you'll carry twice the weight for half the reward, when you'll sacrifice your family time and personal life to make them look good to their bosses. My team trusted me in a way they never trusted upper management. Caleb Rodriguez would come into my office with a stressed look and say, "If you leave, Logan, this whole place will fall apart." I used to laugh it off, but deep down, I knew he was right. I'd trained them, mentored them, defended them when leadership tried to blame them for problems created by poor planning at the top. They weren't just talented, they were fiercely loyal, not to Redline, but to me. Ashley Brooks would stay late to help me solve routing problems that weren't even her responsibility. Hunter Davis would come in early to prep for client calls because he knew I valued thoroughness and attention to detail. And for years, that loyalty from my team was the only thing that kept me going through the disappointments and broken promises. I believed that loyalty meant something. I believed Shane when he said the VP seat was just waiting for final approval. I believed the promises because I wanted to, because I needed to, because after investing 15 years of my life and building my family's financial future on the assumption that advancement was coming, I couldn't imagine they would look me in the eye and lie. I was wrong about that. I can admit that now without shame. Because looking back, my biggest mistake wasn't trusting them. It was assuming that any company, no matter how polished its mission statement or how warm its holiday parties, would ever value quiet competence over their own comfort and political convenience. The day Shane proved that to me was the day everything began to unravel for him, not for me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly how it happened, because the details matter when you're talking about 15 years of a man's career going down the drain in a single conversation. I remember every detail of that Friday afternoon, the way you remember the moment a doctor says the word cancer. Nothing dramatic at first, nothing loud or explosive, just a tone, a posture, a shift in the air that told me something irreversible was coming. Shane had scheduled the meeting 3 months earlier, labeling it final review and transition planning. I'd repeated that phrase in my head for weeks, letting myself believe that after 15 years of carrying Redline's operations on my shoulders, I would finally get the title and authority that matched the work I'd been doing for years. Hell, I'd already started mentally planning how to tell Diana and Sarah, how we could finally breathe a little easier about the mortgage, maybe even start looking at those better colleges Sarah had her eye on. By the time I walked down the hallway toward his office at 2:59 p.m., I'd already rehearsed how I'd accept the promotion with professionalism, how I'd thank him, even though we both knew the promotion was something I'd earned long before he ever acknowledged it. What I didn't rehearse was how to respond to what actually happened. Shane didn't even look up when I stepped into his office. He was staring at a stack of papers, tapping a pen like he was waiting for an Uber, not for the man who'd saved his career more times than he realized. That should have been my first warning sign. In the Army Reserve, we learned to read body language, to assess situations before they went sideways. Shane's posture was all wrong, defensive, avoidant, guilty. "Have a seat," he said, still not making eye contact. I sat, adjusting my tie, trying to ignore the cold heaviness gathering in my stomach. We'd had dozens of meetings together over the years, but never one that felt this wrong. My gut instinct, honed by years of military training and crisis management, was screaming that this wasn't going where I expected. Finally, he set the pen down, leaned back in his chair, and exhaled with the kind of forced heaviness people use when they want to appear burdened by a decision they actually benefited from. "I'm going to get straight to it," he said. The board decided to pause the VP expansion for now. I blinked once, slowly, waiting for him to clarify. He didn't. "Pause," he repeated like the word tasted better the second time. "They feel the timing isn't right to add another executive. Budget concerns, economic pressures. You know how it is." He finally lifted his eyes to mine, and for a split second, I saw it. The flicker of something he didn't control fast enough. Guilt, fear, avoidance. The look of someone who had known this meeting would end like this long before I walked into the room. "But Shane, the promotion package was already approved," I said, voice steady, even though my chest had tightened. I was thinking about the conversation I'd had with Diana just last week, about finally being able to relax our budget, maybe take that family vacation we'd been putting off for 3 years. "You told me the final step was just documenting the transition timeline. Did something change?" "Look, these things happen," he replied, shrugging in a way that reminded me of a teenager pretending not to care. "Priorities shift, budgets tighten. You know how it is. We all have to adapt." Adapt. That word hit harder than I expected, especially coming from someone who'd never had to adapt to anything more challenging than choosing which restaurant to expense for lunch. I'd been adapting for years, adapting to being overlooked, adapting to doing work 2 levels above my pay grade, adapting to every last-minute emergency the executives couldn't handle. I'd adapted my family life around this job, missed dinners, soccer games, family time, all because I believed the company would eventually recognize what I brought to the table. Adaptation was the only reason Redline was still standing, but now he was weaponizing it, using my loyalty and work ethic like a cushion for his decisions. "I understand budget shifts," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "But compensation was tied to responsibilities I've already taken on. If the title is delayed, is the salary at least being adjusted to reflect what I'm actually doing here?" That was the moment he broke eye contact again. The moment I knew this wasn't about budgets or timing. This was about something else entirely. "The board wants roles and pay to remain aligned with organizational structure," he said, reciting it like a script he'd memorized. "Once the VP seat opens again, you'll be first in line." First in line. I'd been first in line for 2 years. It was the same line they'd been feeding me since 2022. The same carrot they dangled to keep me quiet, to keep me grinding through 16-hour snowstorm reroutes and midnight freight reassignments that made Shane look like he had impeccable leadership instincts to his bosses. I stared at him, really stared, and the truth became impossible to ignore. This decision wasn't about budgets, it wasn't about timing or organizational structure. This was about control and convenience. If they promoted me, they'd have to pay me what I was worth. If they kept me where I was, They could squeeze every ounce of operational expertise out of me without giving me the authority or recognition I'd earned 10 times over. And Shane, comfortable and protected Shane, could keep his nephew stationed conveniently close to the leadership pipeline without having to worry about competition from someone who actually knew how to run operations. He didn't say that part out loud. He didn't need to. His body language said it for him. The way he couldn't maintain eye contact, the rehearsed responses, the complete lack of acknowledgement for what this meant for my family's financial planning. Still, I forced myself to breathe evenly. "So after 15 years, I said quietly, you're telling me the board suddenly doesn't believe adding a VP is necessary?" "Not at this time," he replied quickly. "Be patient, Logan. You're valuable to us. Keep doing what you're doing." There it was. The line every exploited worker eventually hears. Keep doing what you're doing. Translation: stay quiet. Don't ask questions. Carry the weight so we don't have to. Accept that your value to us is in staying exactly where you are, doing exactly what you've been doing, for exactly what we've been paying you. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with clean and final precision, like a rope that had been fraying for years finally giving way. I gathered my notebook, stood, and said thank you for the update. My voice was calm, cold, and certain, and Shane, in his comfortable arrogance, had no idea he had just ignited the beginning of his own collapse. When I walked out of Shane's office, the hallway felt different. I moved on instinct, the way you move after hearing devastating medical news. Calm, steady, detached enough to function, but too raw to feel the full weight yet. My military training kicked in. Assess the situation, don't react emotionally, plan your next move. I closed my office door behind me and sat down slowly, staring at my screen without really seeing it. For years, I'd convinced myself that patience was a virtue, that loyalty would eventually pay off, that people like Shane were simply slow to recognize the value of the work people like me did. But sitting at my desk that afternoon, thinking about the conversation I'd have to have with Diana, about explaining to Sarah why her college options might need to change, the truth finally crystallized. They never intended to reward me. The promotion was never waiting on a board meeting or budget approval. It was a story they told me to keep me doing the work no one else could, to keep me sacrificing family time and personal well-being for their benefit. I opened my email, not to work, but because I needed something to anchor myself. That's when I saw the messages I'd ignored for months. Recruiters, competitors, former colleagues, people who had left Redline and said, "You're too good to stay there, Logan. They're using you. Come join us." I'd always brushed them off, telling myself Redline would come through. Diana had even mentioned some of them. "Logan, didn't Mike from Consolidated reach out again? Maybe you should at least listen to what he has to say." But I'd been loyal, committed, stubborn in my belief that hard work would be rewarded. Now, reading those subject lines, operations director role, leadership opening, we need someone like you, I felt something shift. It wasn't desperation, it was possibility. It was the same feeling I'd had in the military when a bad situation suddenly presented a tactical opportunity. The email that stopped me cold was from 3 weeks earlier, from Brady Coleman, CEO of Summit Flow Logistics. I'd heard the name whispered with equal parts respect and envy in industry circles. He'd built Summit Flow from a local carrier into a tech-driven powerhouse challenging national brands like ours. The subject line was simple. Would you consider a conversation? "Logan, I've followed your work for years. Your operational strategies at Redline have become reference points in our hiring and training programs. If you're ever open to leading at a higher level, we have a VP seat that needs someone with your instincts and experience. I'd value the chance to speak with you directly. Brady." There it was. Direct, clear, no games, no carrots on strings. A real offer from someone who didn't need to be convinced of my worth, who had done his homework and knew exactly what I brought to the table. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of me felt disloyal, like I was betraying something sacred. Part of me felt furious that I even felt disloyal after what Shane had done. But the strongest part, the part that remembered what it felt like to be a provider, a leader, a man whose expertise was valued, that part felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. I typed a reply without hesitating. "Brady, thank you for reaching out. I'm available this weekend if you still have time." I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. It was 4:22 p.m., 38 minutes after Shane told me to keep doing what you're doing, 38 minutes after 15 years of loyalty officially expired. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A new email. Brady had responded faster than Shane typically replied to urgent operational crises. Tomorrow morning, 9:30, Summit Flow HQ. Been waiting for your yes. Waiting for my yes. Not waiting for me to prove myself again. Not waiting for me to accept scraps disguised as opportunity. Not waiting for budget approval or board meetings. Waiting for me to decide I was worth more than what Redline was willing to give. I looked around my office, my neat files, my operational binders, the wall calendar marked with deadlines and crisis prevention protocols I had designed myself. For the first time in years, I didn't feel pride when I looked at all that work. I felt clarity. Redline didn't deserve what I'd built here. They never had. I drove home that evening with the radio off, thinking. When I walked through the front door, Diana was in the kitchen helping Sarah with homework. Normal family life, the life I'd been working so hard to secure and improve. How did the meeting go? Diana asked, looking up from Sarah's math problems. She knew how much this promotion meant to our family's financial future. I kissed her forehead and sat down at the kitchen table. It didn't go the way we expected, I said, but I think I might have a better option. I told her about Brady's email about the opportunity at Summit Flow. Diana listened the way she always did, thoughtfully, asking the right questions, thinking about what it meant for all of us. Logan, she said finally, you've given Redline everything. If they can't see what they have in you, maybe it's time someone else got the chance. Sarah looked up from her homework. Dad, does this mean we might not have to worry about the college money anymore? I reached over and squeezed her hand. It means your old man isn't going to settle for being undervalued anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. For the first time in years, I felt like I was about to have a conversation where my value wouldn't be questioned, where my experience would be respected, where the person across the table would see me as an asset rather than a convenience. Summit Flow's headquarters sat at the edge of Denver's tech district, all steel lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, nothing like Redline's outdated brick building that smelled faintly of stale coffee and small-time thinking. As I walked through the lobby the next morning, the receptionist greeted me by name before I even introduced myself. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how differently this company operated. Brady Coleman met me outside the conference room, hand extended, expression warm but sharp in a way that made it clear he missed nothing. Logan, I'm glad you're here, he said, not as a pleasantry, but as a statement of fact. I'd spent most of my career watching executives pretend to care during meetings they barely prepared for. Brady was the opposite. He sat across from me with a binder full of my work, process diagrams I'd built, efficiency models I'd designed, risk analyses I'd written during crises. Redline pretended never happened. I've studied your systems for years, he said. You built Redline's stability, but they'll never give you the authority to lead because your leadership threatens theirs. It was startling hearing the truth spoken so plainly. At Redline, everything was half said, half promised, half explained. Here, everything was direct, clean, honest. The way men in the military talk to each other, no politics, just facts. You don't know what happened yesterday, I said cautiously. I don't need to, he replied. I know how companies like Redline treat the people who make them successful. They mistake loyalty for weakness until it costs them everything. He opened a folder and slid a contract toward me. Not a promise, not an invitation to wait for budget approvals. An actual contract. Vice President of Regional Operations, he said. Full authority, salary that reflects what you're actually worth, performance equity, and the freedom to build your team without interference. I looked at the numbers. They were 40% higher than what Redline had been promising me for 3 years. Enough to handle Sarah's college tuition without stress, enough to finally give Diana some financial security, enough to make me feel like a provider again instead of a guy getting taken advantage of. Why me? I asked. Because you've already been doing this job, he said simply. The only thing you've been missing is the title and the respect that goes with it. There was no flattery in his voice, no manipulation, just truth, the kind that settled into your bones and felt impossible to deny. I signed the offer before fear or old habits could pull me back. Brady shook my hand like we'd just concluded serious business between equals. One more thing, he said. If you know good people who deserve better than Redline can give, I'm ready to hire. I thought of Caleb's worn-out determination, Ashley's brilliance overlooked by management, Hunter's quiet competence buried under Redline's chaos. I didn't make any promises, but I knew that talent follows respect, not titles. I walked into my new office at Summit Flow at exactly 8:32 a.m. on Monday morning. The space was mine. Clean desk, modern equipment, a window overlooking the district. No crisis waiting for me like a trap. No Shane pacing outside my door pretending he was the one keeping operations functional. I had barely logged into my system when my personal phone started buzzing with the intensity of a fire alarm. The first notification was an email forward from a colleague still at Redline. Caleb's resignation letter, submitted at 8:07 a.m., effective in 2 weeks. By 9:12 a.m., Ashley's resignation followed. Her letter was professional but cold. I'm grateful for the experience. It's time to grow elsewhere. At 9:55 a.m., Hunter's resignation came through, even shorter. Thank you for the opportunities. Moving on to new challenges. I knew what this meant. They weren't following me because I'd recruited them. I hadn't said a word to any of them. They were leaving because good people don't stay where they're diminished, and they don't wait around once they see there's a place that might actually value what they bring. At 10:23 a.m., my phone rang. Shane's name on the screen. "Logan," he said, voice already fraying. "What's happening? 3 senior staff resigned this morning." "I heard," I said calmly. "And? Don't play games with me. Did you talk to them? Did you encourage this?" "Shane, they're adults," I replied. They made their own decisions about their careers. Silence. Heavy, panicked silence that told me he was finally seeing the cliff he'd been walking toward. "We need to discuss bringing you back," he said quickly. "Your promotion. We can fast-track it." "The one you paused indefinitely?" I interrupted. "That promotion? Look, things change. Priorities shift. We can make this right." "That won't be necessary," I said. "I'm VP at Summit Flow now." His sharp intake of breath cut through the phone. "Logan, they're our competitor. They're the company that offered me what you wouldn't." I didn't raise my voice. Quiet truth hits harder than yelling ever could. The thing about operational collapse is that it doesn't start with an explosion. It starts with silence, an email unanswered, a shipment delayed, a client question no one can answer because the person who knew the answer isn't there anymore. Within a week, Redline's on-time delivery dropped 10%. The winter protocol I'd built failed because no one understood how it worked. Client complaints started rolling in. Shane hired a consultant at $15,000 a week to try to reverse engineer systems I'd built over 15 years. But you can't buy back institutional knowledge. You can't rebuild trust once everyone's watched you squander it. 2 weeks after Shane told me to be patient, he called again. This time, desperation had replaced arrogance. "We can't survive this, Logan." "Then you should have treated the people who kept you alive better," I said. In the months that followed, Redline's story became a case study in how not to manage talent. Industry conferences used their collapse as a warning for executives who believed good people were replaceable. At Summit Flow, I built something better. My team from Redline joined me within 6 months, thriving in an environment that valued competence over politics. We landed contracts with companies that had grown tired of Redline's instability. 1 year later, I spoke at a leadership forum about workplace loyalty and respect. The audience was full of guys like me, experienced, capable, undervalued. I told them what I wished someone had told me sooner. "Your loyalty should never be cheaper than your self-respect," I said. "And when someone shows you they don't value what you bring, believe them the first time. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes it's the strongest thing a man can do." Because the collapse of Redline wasn't my revenge. It was just what happens when you finally stop carrying weight that was never yours alone to bear.